Today, we're going to talk about a meeting that did not make loud headlines. No flashing cameras, no press conferences, no official photos. Yet what happened behind closed doors in Muscat, Oman, may shape the geopolitical map of the Middle East for the next decade. On one side of the indirect table, Iran. On the other side, the United States. In between them, Omani diplomats, quietly carrying messages back and forth like messengers in a high-stakes chess match. And just hours ago, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stepped forward and said something that changed the entire tone of this dialogue. He made it crystal clear. Iran will never accept zero uranium enrichment. That one sentence tells us everything. It means this: either the United States accepts Iran's right to enrich uranium on its own soil, or there will be no deal, no compromise, no agreement. So the real question is no longer, are they talking? The real question is, are we heading toward a fragile understanding or toward another dangerous confrontation in the Middle East? And more importantly, what are Russia and China doing quietly behind the scenes while this is unfolding? Let's break this down step by step. Why did the Muscat meeting even happen? Since the return of the Trump administration to power, tensions in the Middle East have been climbing steadily. Iran has accelerated its nuclear program. The United States has increased its military presence across the region. Warships, air defense systems, surveillance operations. The signals are unmistakable. Both sides understand one very uncomfortable truth. If this trajectory continues without any communication, the situation can spiral out of control very quickly. That is where Oman stepped in. Now you might ask, why Oman? Because Oman is the only Gulf country that maintains good, functional relationships with both Tehran and Washington. They have played this mediator role before, quietly, effectively, without media noise. But here's what makes this meeting even more interesting. Iranian and American diplomats did not sit face to face. This was a completely indirect dialogue. Omani diplomats would sit with the Iranian side, listen carefully, then walk to another room and relay the message to the American side. Then they would return with the response, a diplomatic shuttle, room to room, message to message. And Araghchi himself admitted this first round was a test. Iran wanted to see how serious the United States really is this time, because from Iran's perspective, they've been here before, and they got burned. What exactly does Iran want? In his statement, Araghchi made three positions absolutely clear. Number one, zero enrichment is unacceptable. Let's pause here and explain what this really means. Natural uranium contains only about 0.7% of uranium-235. For a nuclear power plant to generate electricity, you need uranium enriched to 3 to 5%. For a nuclear weapon, you need uranium enriched to 90% or more. Iran says, we want enrichment for peaceful energy purposes. And technically, under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, they do have the right to peaceful nuclear technology. But here's the issue. Iran is already enriching uranium up to 60%. That's far beyond civilian energy needs and dangerously close to weapons grade. So when Iran says, we will never accept zero enrichment, what they are really saying is, this is a matter of sovereignty, not negotiation. Number two, the missile program is not up for discussion. The United States wants limitations on Iran's ballistic missile capabilities. Iran says this is part of its defensive doctrine and will never be on the table. Number three, regional influence is not negotiable. Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Iran's footprint in these areas is a red line. No talks, no concessions. So now ask yourself, with these conditions, is a deal even possible? To answer that, we have to go back to 2015, the lesson from the JCPOA. This nuclear issue is not new. In 2015, under the Obama administration, a historic agreement was signed, the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Under that deal, Iran agreed to reduce uranium enrichment levels, cut down the number of centrifuges, allow international inspections. In exchange, the United States, Europe, and the UN lifted economic sanctions. For the first couple of years, it worked. Iran complied. Sanctions were eased. The tension dropped. Then in 2018, President Trump withdrew from the deal unilaterally. His argument, the deal was weak. It didn't address Iran's missile program or regional activities. Sanctions came back, harder than before. And what did Iran do? They slowly stepped away from their commitments. Enrichment levels increased, Inspections became more limited, and eventually they reached that 60% threshold. The Biden administration spent 4 years trying to revive the deal. It failed. Why? Because Iran said, "We were betrayed once. We need guarantees, not promises." Now Trump is back in power. So from Tehran's perspective, this new round of talks is happening in an atmosphere of deep distrust. That's why this Muscat session was called a test. Now enters Russia and China. Here's where this stops being just a US-Iran issue. Araghchi openly stated that Iran is regularly briefing Russia and China about the progress of these talks. That's very significant, because Russia and China were signatories of the 2015 deal, and when the US pulled out, they were extremely unhappy. This time, Iran does not want a deal that depends solely on Washington's political mood. They want Moscow and Beijing in the room, politically, strategically, and diplomatically. Because if Russia and China are deeply embedded in the structure of a new agreement, the United States cannot simply walk away without consequences. And notice the timing. Russia is deeply engaged in the Ukraine war, yet it is expanding defense cooperation talks with Middle Eastern countries, even discussing joint fifth-generation fighter jet development. Is that business or geopolitics? China, on the other hand, has a 25-year strategic partnership with Iran, covering oil, gas, infrastructure, and investment. So this nuclear dialogue is not just Iran versus America. It is part of a larger power struggle, the US versus the Russia-China axis playing out in the Middle East. And where do Saudi Arabia and Israel fit into this? The Middle East political puzzle is incomplete without them. Saudi Arabia does not want Iran to become a nuclear power. That rivalry is deep, historic, and strategic, even though diplomatic relations were recently restored with Chinese mediation. But make no mistake, the rivalry remains. And then there is one country in the region that has openly said, "We will never allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons. If necessary, we will strike." You know which country that is. Over the past few years, Iranian nuclear scientists have been assassinated. Mysterious explosions have occurred at nuclear facilities. Fingers have been pointed. So now think about America's dilemma. If the US makes a deal with Iran, Saudi Arabia and Israel will not be happy. If the US fails to make a deal, Iran may accelerate toward nuclear capability, which is even more dangerous for them. This is the strategic trap Washington finds itself in. And this is why the Muscat meeting matters far more than it appears on the surface. The tension is not just diplomatic, it is military, strategic, and deeply psychological. The power game behind the diplomatic language. On the surface, this is about nuclear enrichment, but underneath, it's about credibility and control. For Iran, this is about proving one thing. They cannot be bullied into surrendering their sovereign technological capability. For the United States, this is about preventing Iran from reaching the nuclear threshold without starting another war in the Middle East. But for Russia and China, this is an opportunity to show the world that America is no longer the sole power broker in this region. If a new deal emerges where Moscow and Beijing play visible roles, that becomes a symbolic shift in global power balance. It sends a message. Middle Eastern diplomacy no longer runs only through Washington. That's why Iran is briefing them constantly. And that's why the United States cannot ignore them. Why nobody wants war, but nobody wants to compromise either. Here's the paradox. No country involved wants a full-scale war right now. The US is overstretched globally. Iran is under economic pressure. Israel is managing multiple security fronts. Saudi Arabia is focused on economic transformation. Russia is busy in Ukraine. China wants stability for trade. Yet none of them are willing to make the deep compromises required for a full agreement. This creates what diplomats call a managed tension environment. Talks continue, threats remain, military presence stays high, but nobody pulls the trigger. This is the dangerous middle zone where miscalculation becomes the biggest risk. The three possible scenarios ahead. Now let's talk about what can realistically happen in the coming months. Scenario 1, a limited interim deal. Not a grand agreement like 2015, but a smaller, temporary understanding. Iran reduces enrichment from 60% to a lower level. The US offers limited sanction relief, maybe on oil exports or frozen assets. Both sides claim success. Tension drops slightly. Time is bought. This is the most diplomatically attractive option because it avoids humiliation for both sides. Scenario 2. Talks collapse. Shadow war intensifies. If discussions fail, the region does not stay calm. We could see covert strikes on nuclear facilities, cyber attacks, assassinations, more sanctions, Iranian threats to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz, oil prices spike, shipping routes become tense, insurance costs rise, the global economy feels it within days. Scenario 3, the no deal, no war, limbo. This is realistically the most likely outcome. Occasional talks, occasional threats, no breakthrough, no explosion, just long-term uncertainty. And sometimes uncertainty is more destabilizing than open conflict. How this affects ordinary people, including you. You might think this is distant geopolitics. It's not. If tension rises in the Strait of Hormuz, nearly 20% of the world's oil supply is at risk. Oil prices go up. Transportation costs rise. Inflation hits. Food prices feel the pressure. Countries that import energy, like Bangladesh, India, many European nations, immediately feel the economic impact. This is how a quiet meeting in Oman can affect household expenses thousands of miles away. The bigger message, a changing global order. What we are witnessing here is something larger than a nuclear negotiation. We are seeing the gradual shift from a US-dominated global system to a more multipolar world. Iran is no longer negotiating with America alone. It is negotiating with America while leaning on Russia and China. And Middle Eastern countries are watching carefully. They are learning that they now have options. That is a historic shift. The question that remains, will the United States accept Iran's right to limited enrichment for the sake of stability? Will Iran trust American promises after 2018? Will Israel stay patient? Will Saudi Arabia stay quiet? Will Russia and China turn this into a diplomatic victory? These questions will shape the next chapter of Middle Eastern history. For now, both Tehran and Washington are reviewing the outcome of the first Muscat session and deciding whether a second round will happen. The decision made in the next few weeks may determine whether this becomes a story of diplomacy or a story of escalation. And we will be watching closely, because sometimes the most important events in world politics happen without cameras, without headlines, just quiet rooms, tense messages, and very high stakes. Stay tuned.